On the strange and worrying case of a cabinet official in the state of Colorado who was murdered in his home on Tuesday night. The killing happened here at Tom Clements' home in Monument, Colorado, just before 9 p.m. on Tuesday night. A witness described possibly seeing a black Lincoln or a black Cadillac idling outside the victim's home about 15 minutes before the shooting. Authorities thereby called it a vehicle of interest. Well, late this morning at about 11 a.m. Central Time, more than 500 miles away in Texas, a deputy tried to pull over a man heading south in a black Cadillac with Colorado license plates. It was just a routine traffic violation, but the driver of the car responded by opening fire on the deputy, shooting and hitting him 3 times before taking off. He then sped in and out of traffic at about 100 miles an hour, shooting out the window of his car at the officers who were following him in the high-speed chase. Ultimately, he crashed the car into an 18-wheeler. He got out of the car again, fired on the officers again. The officers returned fire, and he was hit. Well, tonight, Colorado investigators are on their way to Texas to determine whether that man in that high-speed chase might be linked to the killing of Tom Clements, the Colorado prisons chief. Law enforcement officials say the man is still unidentified. He's in a Fort Worth hospital tonight where they have fingerprinted him, but he is, in their words, quote, basically legally dead. He's being kept alive on life support machines after reportedly being shot in the head in that police shootout. The deputy who he shot was wearing a bulletproof vest and was also shot in the head, but the deputy's wound is described only as a grazing wound, and he is certainly expected to survive. Colorado investigators will now be working alongside the Texas Rangers in the investigation, but because Tom Clements was the prisons chief in Colorado, the Texas State Division that investigates anything that happens within Texas's prison system is also going to be involved in the investigation now, and law enforcement officials say the FBI was on scene this afternoon as well, making phone calls. Colorado's governor has reacted to all this by saying, quote, "We don't know yet exactly whether this is the guy. There's some indication. I hope it is." Of course, the overall story here is still that we do not know what the motive might be for the killing of Tom Clements, whether it was related to his job running the prisons or to Colorado state politics more broadly, or to neither of those issues. Tuesday night shooting, of course, happened just hours before the Colorado governor was due to sign into law the hotly contested new gun reform legislation that state lawmakers passed last week. Governor Hickenlooper announced the details of the murder of the state's prison director at 8:30 a.m. local time yesterday, and then went on as scheduled later that morning to sign into law his state's new background checks legislation and a new state limit on extended magazines for ammunition in semi-automatic rifles and handguns. Law enforcement sources have not said that there is any reason to connect the killing of the state's prisons chief to his work in the prisons or to broader political issues in Colorado. Still, though, in response to the murder, security has been upped, both for the governor himself and for other members of the state's cabinet. Now, one possible connection between Tom Clements' work and potentially a potential motive for his murder, one potential connection at least that is getting a lot of attention in the Colorado press, is Tom Clements' direct involvement in the case of a man named Humadin Al-Turki, who's now serving out a prison sentence in Colorado. It was almost 7 years ago that Mr. Al-Turki was convicted of keeping a woman as a virtual slave in his house, sexually assaulting her. Last week, Tom Clements wrote to Mr. Al-Turki personally to let him know that he, Tom Clements, was denying his request to serve out the remainder of his sentence in Saudi Arabia, which is Mr. Al-Turki's home country. Today, prison officials moved Mr. Al-Turki to solitary confinement, they said for his own protection because of all the media attention on his case after Mr. Clements' murder. Officials stressed that the decision was not directly related to the Clements murder investigation. They said that Mr. Al-Turki was not being punished. They said that it was simply because of the publicity. It is very disturbing to have a public official murdered ever. Even more unsettling when it happens so inexplicably, when you don't know why. There's also the possibility that the killing was entirely unrelated to his status as a public official. It could just have been either personal or completely random. We learned today that Colorado deputies, for example, are looking into a possible link to a Craigslist ad that Tom Clements posted on the day of the killing. They're investigating whether the person who shot him might have gone to his home on the pretense of buying the bicycle that was posted in the ad. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office is reportedly checking Mr. Clements' cell phone records to see who he had been speaking to in the days before his death. As yet, this remains an absolutely open question. The significance of what happened here in terms of its broader connection to politics and public policy, and also just the tragedy of this death. No suspects in custody and no word yet on a motive, but we will keep you posted.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. We do not give up. Expect surprises. Subscribe.